Yes or no?
Yes.
That they're quick toasted to capture that fresh corn flavor. That they're so light and crisp they just about float into your bowl.
Yes, yes.
In Hollywood, stories are everything, but some of the most powerful tales aren't scripted, they're lived. This is the story of Ron Howard, from redheaded child actor in a town that never existed to one of the most respected, scandal-free, and quietly successful filmmakers in cinematic history. Along the way, he experienced backstage tensions, battled professional controversies, and built one of the strongest love stories in the entertainment world. But behind that calm exterior lies a career forged in quiet storms, and an origin inside one of television's most iconic illusions. On October 3rd, 1960, the Andy Griffith Show premiered on CBS, and almost overnight, it became an American institution. Audiences across the country tuned in weekly to escape into the tranquil, fictional town of Mayberry, North Carolina, a place where time seemed to stand still, where doors were never locked, neighbors knew each other by name, and life moved to the rhythm of front porch swings and fishing trips. At the heart of the show was Sheriff Andy Taylor, played with effortless charm by Andy Griffith, and his young son Opie, portrayed by 6-year-old Ronnie Howard, whose red hair and wide-eyed innocence won over millions. What many don't realize is that the Andy Griffith Show didn't begin as a standalone pilot. It was introduced through a backdoor episode on The Danny Thomas Show, where Andy Taylor appeared as a small-town sheriff. The character struck such a chord that CBS greenlit an entire series centered around him, and the rest is television history. The show's success wasn't just due to its homespun humor or lovable character. It tapped into a collective longing for a simpler America, a version of the country that felt safer, slower, and more grounded. Though it aired in the 1960s, a decade marked by political unrest, civil rights struggles, and cultural upheaval, the Andy Griffith Show deliberately echoed an earlier time. Griffith himself once said the show felt more like the 1930s than the era in which it aired, and that nostalgia was no accident. It was by design. The show ran for 8 seasons, producing 249 episodes, 159 in black and white, 90 in color, and it never ranked below 7th place in the Nielsen ratings. Remarkably, it was one of only 3 shows in history to end its final season ranked number 1, alongside I Love Lucy and Seinfeld. Its enduring popularity led to multiple spin-offs, including Gomer Pyle, USMC, and Mayberry RFD, as well as a 1986 reunion movie, Return to Mayberry. To this day, fans still gather annually in Griffith's real-life hometown of Mount Airy, North Carolina, for the Mayberry Days Festival, a testament to the show's deep cultural imprint. But behind the folksy charm of Mayberry, as we later learned, were stories far more complex. For 8 seasons and 249 episodes, 159 in black and white and 90 in color, viewers felt like they belonged to the Taylor family. They laughed with bumbling deputy Barney Fife, found comfort in Aunt Bee's cooking, and watched Opie grow up right before their eyes. But the peace of Mayberry was a masterful illusion. Behind the white picket fences and fiddle-laced score were real people with real tension, none more significant than the quiet but icy feud between Andy Griffith and Frances Bavier, the woman who played Aunt Bee. Ron Howard once said that viewers assumed the closeness they saw on screen reflected real-life bond. In some cases, that was absolutely true. His relationship with Andy Griffith was not just warm, it was formative. Griffith wasn't merely a co-star. He became a teacher, a role model, and a steady presence in young Ronnie's life during his most impressionable years. For a child actor navigating the unfamiliar world of studio sets and long filming days, Griffith's kindness offered something rare: safety. Howard often recounted the story of the toy turtle, how, during one of his earliest scenes, he had to pretend the turtle was dead. He didn't understand how to act out something so abstract, but Andy sat him down, gently walked him through the process, and explained the power of imagination. It was kind of funny, Howard said, but it taught me early that acting wasn't about faking, it was about believing. That moment encapsulates Griffith's gift for mentorship. He understood that acting, especially for a child, had to be grounded in feeling, not performance. Off camera, Griffith made sure Ronnie never felt like an outsider. He talked to him like a peer, invited him into conversations with the crew, and made the set a place of learning, not pressure. When Ron struggled with a scene, Griffith didn't scold. He coached. He helped Howard understand blocking, timing, and comedic rhythm, often between takes, quietly planting the seeds of the directing career Howard would later pursue. Howard's admiration for Griffith never faded. In interviews decades later, even as an Oscar-winning director, he still called Andy one of the greatest influences of his life. And it wasn't just about acting. Griffith showed him how to lead a set, how to treat people, and how to stay grounded amidst success. Their bond also influenced the authentic chemistry between Andy and Opie. It wasn't manufactured, it was real. Their scenes of fishing, life lessons, and quiet talks on the front porch weren't just television. They were moments drawn from a genuine relationship built on trust, respect, and care. In many ways, Andy Griffith didn't just raise Opie Taylor. He helped raise Ron Howard. But with Frances Bavier, it was a different story. To the world, Aunt Bee was gentle, nurturing, and endlessly patient. To those on set, Bavier was private, meticulous, and often cold. Ron Howard later admitted he dreaded filming scenes with her. He wasn't cruel, she was unapproachable. And that emotional distance affected everyone, including Andy Griffith himself. Their off-screen relationship was never warm. Griffith, ever the peacekeeper, once showed up at her North Carolina home hoping to bury the hatchet. She shut the door on the attempt. The divide deepened. It wasn't until near the end of her life, after battling illness and reflecting on her past, that Bavier finally reached out. In a phone call to Griffith, she apologized. "I'm sorry we didn't get along better. It was my fault." It was a moment of humility that closed decades of emotional distance. But that kind of reconciliation came too late to erase the unease that Ron Howard had carried for years. Behind the sweetness of Mayberry, he had learned what it felt like to work with someone who made him feel small. Ron Howard wasn't just a child star. He was a student of storytelling, raised in a home where performance was a way of life. Born on March 1, 1954 in Duncan, Oklahoma, Ronald William Howard entered a world already steeped in creativity. His father, Rance Howard, born Harold Rance Beckenholt, was a former U.S. Air Force serviceman who reinvented himself as a character actor and screenwriter. His mother, Jean Spiegel Howard, was a classically trained actress who had graced both stage and screen. Together, they weren't just raising a child, they were crafting a future storyteller from day one. Ron grew up in a world of scripts, set rehearsals, and call sheets. Family dinners sometimes doubled as script reading, and lessons about emotion, delivery, and stage presence learned long before school ever began. Acting wasn't a whim or hobby, it was a craft. By the time most kids were learning how to tie their shoes, Ron was already hitting his marks on sound stages and memorizing lines. Despite the chaos of a working actor's life, the Howards emphasized balance. Ron split his time between studio tutors and traditional education, attending John Burroughs High School in Burbank, California. He even briefly enrolled at the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts, though he didn't graduate. Why? Because by that point, the industry already recognized him as something special. His education was happening in real time, on film sets, in directors' chairs, and behind the camera. By age 5, Ron Howard had already appeared in The Journey and made guest appearances on iconic shows like The Twilight Zone, Dennis the Menace, and The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. These early roles taught him not just how to act, but how a production functioned. He studied camera placement, watched how directors spoke to actors, and observed the rhythms of storytelling from multiple angles. This rare early access gave Ron something most actors never have: a technical and emotional fluency in the filmmaking process before he was even a teenager. It wasn't just that he knew how to be in a story, he was beginning to understand how to build one. That foundational knowledge would soon take him far beyond the streets of Mayberry. By age 5, Ron had already appeared in films and hit shows like The Twilight Zone and Dennis the Menace, but The Andy Griffith Show made him a household name. Credited as Ronnie Howard, he wasn't polished. He was real, curious, goofy, sometimes frustrated, always grounded. That authenticity helped make Mayberry feel genuine, even if its charm was manufactured. And when The Andy Griffith Show wrapped in 1968, Ron Howard didn't disappear. He transitioned into his teenage years with ease, eventually finding new fame as Richie Cunningham on Happy Days, opposite Henry Winkler's legendary Fonzie. Together, they captured the essence of the 1950s and made the show a defining hit of the 1970s. But even then, Howard was eyeing something beyond acting. He wanted to tell stories, not just live in them. In 1977, at age 23, Ron Howard made his directorial debut with Grand Theft Auto, a scrappy action comedy he co-wrote with his father. The opportunity came through a deal with Roger Corman. Star in Eat My Dust and get a chance to direct. It worked. From there, Howard directed several television movies before landing a breakout theatrical hit in 1982 with Night Shift, starring Michael Keaton and Henry Winkler. 2 years later, he helmed Splat, a romantic fantasy comedy that launched Tom Hanks into stardom. Audiences now saw what Ron Howard always knew. He was a storyteller first. Hits followed: Cocoon, Willow, Parenthood, and Backdraft. But it wasn't until 2001's A Beautiful Mind that Howard was catapulted into the directorial elite. A Beautiful Mind was everything Hollywood loves. Power, emotion, based on a true story. It starred Russell Crowe as mathematician John Nash, whose brilliance was matched only by his struggle with mental illness. The film won Best Picture. Howard won Best Director. But the celebration didn't last long. Critics pounced. Key aspects of John Nash's life, his bisexuality, a child born out of wedlock, and his abandonment of that child were notably absent from A Beautiful Mind. For a film that was positioned as a biographical portrayal, many felt the omissions were not just creative choices, but deliberate whitewashing. Ron Howard and his screenwriter, Akiva Goldsman, defended the decision, explaining that the film was never intended to be a complete documentary of Nash's life. Instead, it aimed to capture the emotional truth of his journey, his genius, his battle with schizophrenia, and his eventual redemption. But the backlash wasn't just about historical accuracy. It sparked a broader debate in Hollywood over how far a filmmaker can go in reshaping reality for narrative clarity. Some critics accused Howard of sanitizing the story to make Nash more sympathetic and the film more Oscar-friendly. For Howard, a director known for his integrity and respect for real-life subjects, the controversy was deeply personal. Adding to the tension, Nash himself began to feel the ripple effects. As the scrutiny grew, journalists and media outlets began digging deeper into his personal life, putting details he'd long kept private into the spotlight. Howard later admitted that the unintended impact on Nash was what bothered him most. Not the criticism of the film, but how it hurt the man behind the story. In the end, A Beautiful Mind still triumphed, winning 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. But the experience left Howard with a sobering reminder. When you tell someone else's story, even with compassion, there will always be parts you can't control. Worse, the criticism impacted Nash personally. For Howard, that crossed a line. He hadn't just made a film, he had shaped someone's legacy. And now, that legacy was under fire. It wouldn't be the last time. In 2020, Ron Howard took on Hillbilly Elegy, a film adaptation of J.D. Vance's best-selling memoir that chronicled a gritty, deeply personal account of growing up in a working-class Appalachian family. At the time, Vance was not yet a public political figure, but rather a former Marine and Yale Law School graduate, offering a unique perspective on generational poverty, addiction, and the cultural decline of rural America. Howard was drawn to the story not for its political undertones, but for its raw emotional core, a multi-generational struggle rooted in trauma, loyalty, and survival. The film starred Glenn Close as the hardened but fiercely protective grandmother, Mama, and Amy Adams as Bev, the troubled, drug-addicted mother of the protagonist. Howard focused the narrative on the universal themes of family dysfunction and personal perseverance. He said he saw it as a story about overcoming adversity, not political ideology. His intent was to humanize the experiences of many Americans often overlooked in mainstream cinema, and to do so without judgment or agenda. But soon after the film's release, the national conversation shifted. J.D. Vance entered the political spotlight and began aligning himself with increasingly controversial and far-right rhetoric. His transformation from reflective memoirist to firebrand candidate stunned many, including Howard. The director, known for his measured and apolitical demeanor, found himself in an uncomfortable position. The man whose story he'd tried to portray with nuance and compassion was now championing ideologies far removed from the film's spirit. Rather than publicly denounce Vance, Howard responded with his characteristic restraint. But his disappointment was unmistakable. In interviews, he subtly distanced himself from Vance's political persona, emphasizing that Hillbilly Elegy was never intended as a political statement. The The man Howard had once seen as a complex and damaged voice of a forgotten region had become something unrecognizable, a symbol in a culture war that the filmmaker never signed up for. It was a sobering reminder for Howard. Even the most sincere storytelling can be overtaken by forces beyond your control. And when you lend your craft to someone else's narrative, you may not recognize the story once it's out in the world. Howard never lashed out publicly. That's not his style. But in interviews, the disappointment was clear. It echoed an old feeling of being blindsided by someone you once trusted, someone who looked kind on the surface, but left you cold underneath. In the glitz and scandal of Hollywood, long marriages are rarer than Oscar wins. But Ron and Cheryl Howard, they've quietly defied every expectation. They met at 16, 2 kids in California, sharing pizza after a movie in Ron's mint green VW Beetle. That car would become a symbol of something pure and lasting. Ron proposed 3 times before Cheryl finally said yes, because she wanted to finish school, find herself, and make sure she was ready. That patience set the tone for everything that followed. They married in 1975. 50 years later, they're still paddling through life's river, side by side. Through kids, 4 of them, including actresses Bryce and Paige, careers, chaos, and calm. Through Oscar campaigns and toddler tantrums, through bad scripts, good scripts, and everything in between. Ron calls Cheryl his compass, his muse, his truth-teller. She calls their marriage a team effort, one grounded in shared values and the quiet decision to keep choosing each other every day. In 2023, for their 48th anniversary, Ron surprised Cheryl with a drive in that same mint green VW. No red carpets, no champagne, just them, just love. Very few in Hollywood transition from child star to respected director without leaving scorched earth behind. But Ron Howard did, and he did it with grace. He's worked with Tom Hanks, Russell Crowe, Kate Blanchett, and Jim Carrey. He's helmed Apollo 13, Frost, Nixon, The Da Vinci Code, and Solo, a Star Wars story. He's been trusted with blockbusters, awards contenders, even reboots of American icons. But through it all, he's kept something sacred, his character. He's never been a tabloid headline, never launched a Twitter feud, never forgotten the lessons he learned as a little boy in Mayberry. Learning how to fake cry over pickles he hated eating. Yes, Ron Howard hated pickles. And in one memorable episode, The Pickle Story, he had to eat jars of Aunt Bee's terrible pickles, take after take. That scene, miserable as it was, became one of the show's funniest. That's storytelling. That's Ron Howard. Ron Howard has seen it all. He's directed Oscar-winning films and been part of TV shows that defined generations. But his real power lies in how he sees people, not as roles or reputations, but as story. He knows how easily charm can mask coldness, how sincerity can be staged, how a best-selling memoir or an Emmy-winning sitcom can leave things unsaid. His message now is subtle but essential. Watch closely, think critically, and understand that even in the most wholesome-looking places, whether it's Mayberry or the halls of Congress, people aren't always who they pretend to be. Ron Howard has lived long enough in the spotlight to recognize the difference between performance and authenticity. And while he's seen both brilliance and betrayal in those around him, he's chosen a different path. Ron Howard isn't bitter. He's evolved from Opie to Oscar, from Richie Cunningham to revered director. His journey has been defined not by loud headlines or scandal, but by a deep and steady commitment to storytelling with heart, purpose, and integrity. He's built a life not on drama, but direction, not on spectacle, but substance, not on fiction, but family. And in the end, that might be his greatest story of all. Because while Hollywood loves meteoric rises and shocking falls, Ron Howard represents something far rarer: consistency. He has quietly navigated the chaos of fame, steered clear of controversy, and emerged as one of the most trusted creative minds in the industry. He's directed everything from high-stakes thrillers like Apollo 13 to whimsical fantasies like The Grinch. Yet through it all, he's remained grounded. Perhaps that's why his voice carries weight. When Ron Howard speaks, even in quiet disappointment, it resonates. He understands that truth isn't always clean, and characters aren't always what they seem. But if there's one thing he's proven over decades in the public eye, it's this: you don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to tell the right story, and tell it well.